welcome to a fresh new episode of Geopolitics with Swasti, where our consulting editor and strategic affairs expert, Swasti Rao, takes your questions, dear subscribers, on geopolitical developments across the world. So, Swasti, this time we have an overwhelming set of questions on defense missiles and techs, and I think that follows Operation Sindoor. So, I decided to start with it, and I have actually taken a question which is not from a subscriber, but I think it's a very interesting question. And this is jumping straight in, this is Anil Sharma, who has basically asked that, during Operation Sindoor, we heard a lot of names like BrahMos and others. What we did not hear about was Prithvi's name, which is very potent, and so he has asked a question on what is Prithvi, why was it not used, and what is its entire utility like?
Right. No, it's an interesting question, and it's also incentive enough for you to now become a member, because Devdatta has selected your question as the opening question for this episode. Now, very quickly, देखो क्या है कि yes, it's true that Prithvi missiles were not really used in Operation Sindoor, and there's a reason why. But before I come to why they were not really used, I'll just give you a bit of a primer, on what really Prithvi is. See, now Prithvi is a very, is a traditionally sort of developed missile. In fact, if you remember that it is in fact DRDO's program where they first started out in the 70s thinking that now they will have to bring up India's missiles by 80s, and then the Defense Research and Development Laboratory, which is a DRDO of course lab in Hyderabad, they published what is called a missile plan for 1980, where they kind of detailed a few concepts, and one of those concepts then eventually became the basis of what later became the basis of Prithvi. So Prithvi has a pretty old history, and I think your curiosity then is very genuine as to why was Prithvi not used. Now, very quickly, see, the thing is that Prithvi is an old generation thing. So different types of Prithvi missiles were then developed. So Prithvi 1, Prithvi 2, Prithvi 3, etc. The original idea was that one would go to the army, one would go to navy, one would go to air force, and also understand that the first Prithvi missiles which were developed, they had a liquid propulsion. Okay. Now, liquid propulsion is a bit of a problem in missiles because sometimes it leaks, so it kind of gives away as to on the radar where you are, right? I mean, there's like telltale signs. So slowly we decided to phase out the liquid fuel technology, and then we got on the solid fuel technology. So later additions and later developments of Prithvi and those classes were all basically mostly based on solid fuel. So and also understand that the range of the first Prithvi wasn't so much. So in many ways you can now sort of, when you look back, you understand that it was more of a technological demonstrator than really something that was deployable, although it was deployed, and I think the initial order was given for quite a few, but then not all were actually deployed. And eventually in the years that followed, because the story is very long and I just want you to have the key takeaway, which is that eventually over the years, the army moved to another type of missiles called Prahar. I'm sure you've heard that name. And Navy moved on to ship-launched missiles called Dhanush. So both Prahar and Dhanush in many ways, and also technologically speaking in terms of derivatives and additions, you can say कि पृथ्वी के ही बच्चे हैं एक तरह से. So Prithvi happens to be the basic program. And also remember that the Prithvi program, with other programs which are also very familiar to you, I'm sure their names like Agni, like Akash, like Trishul, like Nag. Now all of them come under this program called IGMDP, which is Indigenous Missile Development Program, which was in many ways spearheaded by Kalam, Dr. Kalam. Okay, so this is like a long and short sort of history of what really Prithvi missile is, and now you can totally understand that the kind of class of missiles that we now have in terms of the advanced versions, they are all part of our strategic forces command. So you should know that. Now, I am not going into more details of how many kinds of ballistic missiles we have, because I mean, we right now are developing missiles like Agni, etc. They're extremely potent. But your question is on Prithvi, so I'll stick to Prithvi. Otherwise, the classification of missiles themselves is already a very complex thing in its own way. Now, I'll come to the second part of the question, which is actually important, which is that why did we not use it? Now, the thing is that why we did not use a ballistic missile such as Prithvi, not the old generation, like the new generation, the ones that we now have, Because see, you have to understand that for a ballistic missile, and we were just discussing as to what kind of a motion do these missiles take. Typically when you are launching a ballistic missiles, it can be detected more easily on a radar because it is a big object. You can see it. And the other reason is that particularly in the case of India and Pakistan and in the context of Operation Sindoor, the thing is that please remember that from the very beginning we made sure that it should not be very escalatory, right? And to launch a ballistic missile in a war or in a war-like situation, and remember this was not a formal war, this was an operation, it would have been very escalatory because the signaling is very wrong. The signaling is that because the enemy doesn't know whether this particular missile is, and the warhead that it is carrying is, nuclear or not. So the enemy wouldn't know whether the warhead that particular missile is carrying, because it is capable of carrying nuclear warhead as well. So since the enemy cannot tell, therefore the signaling itself is very escalatory. So we did not really require that kind of a signaling in the case of Pakistan. This is the first thing. Because from the very beginning in the case of Pakistan, in the case of Operation Sindoor, we made it very clear that we have identified certain targets which are terror targets and terror camps, and we want to do precision strikes. So we identified about 24 targets across 9 sites, and we used precision guided, missiles. Now the thing is that what you need to understand is that when you have to make precision strikes, so for example, if you have to specifically target the hangars, or if you have to specifically, perpetrate a kind of a hole on their runways or some things like that, whatever we landed up doing, you actually don't need ballistic missiles such as Prithvi. We have better weapons for that. So the weapons like the scalp missiles, etc., the storm shadows that we were mounted on Rafales, or for example the BrahMos that we mounted on Sukhois, etc., those were enough for getting the result that we wanted to achieve. Because please remember that in technical parlance, when military planning is happening, there is a concept which is called weapon to target matching. So just because you have a variety of weapons in your arsenal, you don't land up using them all. You land up using the weapons which match the target. Right. So when military planning is done and when those targets are shortlisted, then you go and look in your arsenal and say, okay, this is the best one for it. Okay, so that weapons to target matching it didn't make any sense for using the ballistic missiles, and we didn't, and therefore we used missiles like the ones I just told you about. So and also, maybe the question then that you would have in your mind is that, so when exactly those missiles are going to be used, like Prithvi, etc. Right. Now, the short answer to that is that that's for an all-out war. Imagine an, Armageddon, if there is an all-out war and you have to sort of now destroy everything. So you then launch these ballistic missiles, intercontinental ballistic missiles as well. And India is one of those few countries that has the technology. But long and short is that in this particular operation, it was not required. So maybe in a different situation is where it was required. So, but one interesting trivia, let me just give you about the ICBMs, is that while I was in Ukraine around the end of last year, and I went to Odessa when it was the first time that Russia launched an ICBM on Ukraine, but that ICBM was not nuclear tipped. Okay, so but still, Russia became the first country in the world to actually launch an ICBM against Ukraine. And I was very much in Odessa, and the target was Odessa because I went to see the port infrastructure, etc. But since it was not nuclear tipped, then we came to know after a while. But still, the signaling itself was extremely escalatory. And you may recall that for many weeks after that, the only discussion that was happening in the war, circles was, why was this ICBM used? Was it a real ICBM? Was it a variant, etc.? So just understand that the signaling per se is completely different, and that was not the signaling that we required for Operation Sindoor at all, and that is the short answer why they were not used. I just want you to have this another takeaway, that don't be under the impression that it is cheap to use missiles like BrahMos compared to something like Prithvi just because the signaling is so much different. In fact, to be really honest, Prithvis are much more cheaper, than BrahMoses. But it is about, like I said, that you have to match your weapon to your target. And in that planning, if a particular kind of a missile makes more sense, you tend to use it, and that's what exactly we did.
So Swasti, following up on that, and I think since there's a lot of discussion about BrahMos nowadays post Operation Sindoor,
Thanks to Rajnath Singh, actually. He was the one who said it so clearly. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, Anil Sharma, Ravi Rules, and Ashish Mandra, among others, have questions on hypersonic missiles. And Anil Sharma asks, I'll go with that first. He asks about India's hypersonic missile program and where it stands today. And Ashish Mandra, following up on that, has a question on SCRAMJET. So, if you could please elaborate on what SCRAMJET actually is, how does it work, and
Okay.
its role in the whole hypersonic missile program.
Now, very quickly, they're interesting. I mean, I like these questions a lot, and then what I try to when I'm preparing for these questions, I just try to keep them simple so that the audiences are able to remember. Because obviously, there's so much information available, but it's very technical. So my task then is to sort of simplify it and then present it in a way that you understand. So I'll try. Now, very quickly, देखो है सब jet engine. Okay. Now, if I can just tell you, help you understand. So SCRAMJET and RAMJET, right? So Ram and Sham. Okay, don't just bear with me because you will remember it this way. Now, basically, what happens is that when you're talking about jet engines, there are two ways to sort of make it. One is that you put a compressor, a turbo fan, etc., and then that is a turbojet engine, which is like an old technology. The other is that you remove all of that and you just basically focus on how the air is coming in. I mean, how these engines are breathing the air without the compressor and the rotator fan and all that. And you then try to do the combustion with it. So, in many ways, you can understand that turbojet is a relatively older technology. And the relatively newer technology is these lighter engines called RAMJET and SCRAMJET. So, Ram or Sham, do bhai. Now, the issue is, I'll tell you what the difference is, and that is the only key difference. The key difference is that both RAMJET and SCRAMJET basically function on breathing of air and using it for combustion. Okay, it's very clean. The difference is that in the case of RAMJET, this particular air breathing, when it comes inside the body of the engine deaccelerates the speed of that air so that when the combustion happens at subsonic speeds, which means less than the speed of sound. Right. Okay, so it's a relatively simpler design. It is a well-tested design. Okay, so it is a sturdy design. You understand? Air breathe hua, but then dono air kha rahe hain. But one is that RAMJET deaccelerates the speed of air so that the combustion happens at a subsonic level. Okay. Now, contrary to that, the SCRAMJET is doing the same thing. It is also focused on inbreathing of that air for combustion, but throughout that process, SCRAMJET is able to maintain supersonic speeds. Right. You understand? एक धीमा कर रहा है, एक same speed को maintain कर रहा है supersonic level पे. Now, from this particular understanding, you can completely get the gist of what I'm trying to convey, which is that the faster you want your engine to move, the option that you will end up choosing is an option where the inbreathing of that air for combustion is not deaccelerated but actually maintained at supersonic speeds. And then I get a lot of questions on what is sonic, supersonic, subsonic, hypersonic. Simple hai. Sonic means speed of sound. Subsonic means less than speed of sound. Supersonic means more than speed of sound but almost around Mach 1, which is like that. And a little bit more than that. And hypersonic basically means almost 4.5 to 5 times the speed of sound. So this is basically a mota difference about how speed of sound becomes so crucial here. So if I just connect the dots and tell you, so the basic difference between RAMJET and SCRAMJET is that the faster you want your glide vehicles and all of these missiles to function, the faster engine you will require. And here is the caveat. The caveat is that while the RAMJET technology is well established, but the SCRAMJET technology is something which is developing, which is on trial. It is not 100% operational. Okay, so new technology, but not as tested as RAMJET. So this is the basic difference between RAMJET and SCRAMJET. Now it is very simple that if you want your missiles to go that fast, which is 4.5 to 5 times the speed of sound, right, you would really require the SCRAMJET technology. And that is the reason why this thing is being discussed so much. Now just another clarification. BrahMos is not a hypersonic missile. Okay, BrahMos goes very fast. BrahMos is a cruise missile, it is not a ballistic missile. Ballistic missile takes a particular projectile, okay, trajectory. But the cruise missile goes closer to the curvature of the earth, okay, so that it becomes difficult to detect on stealth, but at the same time it can go very, very fast, okay. Now, BrahMos technically, the kind of generation that we have right now is in theory, it is about 3 Mach, which means 3 times the speed of sound. But in real war situations and in like not in controlled situations, you would probably get a speed of about 2.5 Mach, which is also very fast, but it does not qualify as hypersonic, which only comes when it is 4.5 to 5 times the speed of sound. Okay. Right. Now, this is the basic thing. Now, the other question is, where are we in this technology? So, talking about what kind of weapons are we, developing. Now, very quickly, India is developing a lot of, these technologies, and especially DRDO is doing it. And also, in rocketry, actually, we have done pretty well. We may not have done very well in, other jet engines, etc. But otherwise, we have a good record here. Very quickly, there are 2 kinds of hypersonic weapon systems that we are trying to develop. One is a hypersonic glide vehicle, the HGVs, which are basically launched by rockets and then they glide towards the target. And the other is the hypersonic cruise missiles, and that's the BrahMos 2, eventually the HCMs, which are powered by SCRAMJET engines. And I just told you what the SCRAMJET engines are, and these are capable of maintaining that hypersonic speed throughout their flight, right? So naturally, the thing about the hypersonic cruise missiles is that they are flying at lower altitudes and they are more difficult to detect and intercept because of their speed and because of their maneuverability. Okay, now that is the basic thing. Now, in terms of what is India doing, now see, from India's perspective, there is at the APJ Abdul Kalam Island, we are testing both these technologies, right? So we are testing for both hypersonic missiles and the glide vectors as well. Now, the thing is that generally there are 3-4 steps. When you say that from the time you test it in the lab to the time you would place a bulk order for them, there are several steps, okay. And just to sort of shorten it for you, you would have to prove it in the lab, then you will have to have a technology demonstrator, then you will have to go for a limited series production to see how it is faring, then you would have a user trial production, etc. So based on all these different stages is when you would reach a bulk order stage. And to just cut a long story short, I think we have been doing trials for many of these versions, and of course otherwise we will need an entire episode of its own. But in short, it will suffice to say that whatever we have done so far in the hypersonic cruise missile segment and all the trials, some have been successful. We are learning constantly, it is evolving constantly, but none of that is deployable right now. And sooner than later, when it gets more deployable, we will see that technology coming in, for example, BrahMos 2. So obviously BrahMos 2 is going to have a scramjet engine and etc. and a lot of other variety also of these hypersonic cruise missiles that we are developing.
So, Swasti, following up on that, Ravi Rules has a question on India's air defense against the 5th generation fighters and its hypersonics.
Oh, wow. Now, it is a very complex question, and I'll try my best to answer this question. So, very quickly, you have asked me air defenses against 5th generation fighters and air defenses against hypersonic cruise missiles. Okay, दोनों बातें अलग-अलग है. One is a fighter, one is a cruise missile. Now, very quickly, see, whenever you talk about any air defense, remember when I was talking about how drones operate. The principle is the same. The principle is called SSITD. And what is SSITD? It is 5 steps. Search, see, identify, track, destroy. Okay? It's the same. You have to search for it. Once you search, then you see it. Then once you see it, then you have to identify it, that is it really a threat. Once you identify it, then you have to track it. And once you are able to track it, then you have to destroy it. This is the very basic war fighting philosophy of any air defense system, whether it's a drone, 5th generation, radar, shadar, whatever it is, okay? You have to just link everything to these steps to make it simpler for you to understand. So remember the SSITD, okay? And now I will connect all of the other technical things to this SSITD so that you are able to understand it better. So the thing is that what happens that when you are talking about a 5th generation fighter, what really makes a 5th generation fighter so special is the stealth capabilities, that you cannot see it, okay? You cannot detect it. Okay, and in this case, when I say the 5th generation fighter, so you're not able to detect it, you're not able to see it. Now if you can't see it, then how do you search for it? If you cannot search for it, then how do you identify it? If you cannot identify it, how do you track it? If you don't track it, how do you destroy it? Right? So it's the SSITD backwards and forwards that you have to basically keep in mind. Now, does that mean to say that 5th generation fighters or 6th generation fighters, okay, are going to be completely invincible? That is not the case, because I was just explaining earlier when we were having a discussion that this is a game of cat and mouse. So as the technology and speed is developing, so is the counter to it developing. So that is where comes the role of modern radars. I mean, you know that radars are of different types. You know, India is also exporting many radars to Armenia, etc. India is also developing many radars. But here comes the role of modern radars. Very quickly, one of those, there are many, but I'm just trying to tell you how, don't carry the impression that 5th generation fighters are completely invincible. No. Over the horizon radars, which are OTH radars, India is also developing them. I mean, Russia also has it. Many countries have it, and especially the bigger superpowers. These radars are capable of tracking, say, a fighter from thousands of kilometers away. Okay, I mean, the technology is such that they are able to do it from thousands of kilometers away, right? The other solution is that you have a combination of radars. Okay, now just understand that the thing is that stealth is only there in certain aspects. But what makes, when you say, oh, it's very stealthy, you don't mean that it's 100% of 100% aspects are stealthy, right? So you have to basically, when you're looking at a counter, you have to catch that particular aspect where you can find some kind of a loophole. Now, so that this is what the combination of radars does. So for example, if you're placing your radar in say, and in the upper troposphere, or if there are pseudo satellites or a combination of sensors, then you basically are able to detect, you know, the signature of that aircraft in other ways also. It's not just about seeing or detecting. So I will just give you an example. So for example, there could be sensors that could detect the infrared, you know, emissions, okay, because there is some heat which is always generated, even if it is not visible, it could be infrared. Similarly, if the aircraft goes on and hangs the weapons outside its body, then also they become easily detected. But these are, you know, little cracks that you can always find. So what happens is that when you're trying to develop a counter to these you know, 5th generation and, you know, all these modern fighters, you have to basically crack the low observability, because they have low observability, but you can crack the low observability. So very quickly, if I can tell you interestingly, radar gives you physical observability, right? Physically, I mean, in terms of seeing and detecting. Heat, which gives you infrared observability. Sound can give you acoustic observability, right? So modern sensors laga ke aap pakad sakte, they're very sensitive, okay? Similarly, modern radars that have that we also have our own in Karnataka, they have 7,000, 8,000 kilometer long ranges. Now, that's what you have to keep in mind, that as is the speed and stealth and those kind of factors developing, the counters to them are also developing. And what I try to do for you is to sort of break it down in a simple way that you can have this key takeaway, that yes, you can play around with the radars, you can have combinations, you can put air sensors, and therefore you can crack the low observability in different ways. Okay. Now, very quickly, once a fighter, whether it's a 5th generation or whatever generation, once it is seen or detected, any flying object, then it is as vulnerable as any other flying object. उसकी सारी जो strength है वो तभी तक है as long as you are not able to see it, so that it launches an attack on you first. But once you are able to see it, then you can launch your weapons on it, right? So that's what. Now, very quickly, the other question, other part of this question was, this was air defenses against 5th generation. Now you have a question of air defense against hypersonic missiles. Now, you see, now here is an interesting thing, and the thing is that any missile, what is a hypersonic missile? Hypersonic missile is a missile that is coming very fast, but the concept is the same. As long as the missile that is coming to you is seen and detected by you, then you can launch back. The problem happens is that when the other missile is coming so fast that you cannot track it, I mean, you cannot see it. Even if you're able to see it, you're not able to, you know, lock it so that you're not able to launch a weapon against it, etc. So the point is that the problem with hypersonic missiles is that it is moving very, very fast. And that is the issue where air defenses face when it comes to tackling the hypersonic missiles. And that is why the legend has become that so far there is no air defense which is capable of taking down a hypersonic missile, like a true hypersonic missile. And perhaps S-400 in theory can take down a hypersonic missile because वही range बहुत ज़्यादा होता है. But अभी real war में अभी तक तो हमने नहीं देखा, especially in the case of Russia, Ukraine also we didn't see. The only thing that we have seen is that the other question then is that, so from the Russia-Ukraine situation, I can give you an example that Ukraine did claim that they have taken down blue-blooded hypersonic missiles from Russia, and those are not BrahMos, by the way. BrahMos is based on something called Onik missiles. These are Kinzhals. Kinzhals are actually the blue-blooded hypersonic missiles, or which are like 4.5 to 5 Mach speed. Now, that is what you have to understand. It is not just about the speed of the missile, because if it is truly hypersonic, how on earth did Ukraine take it down? That happened because it came at a certain geometry. Now, if this missile is coming to you at a 90-degree angle, you are there. So no matter how fast it is, whatever you launch is going to meet it, no, because it's a straight line. But imagine that if it is touching you only tangentially, by the time you see it, it's gone, so that you can't do anything about it. So many a times what you have to see is the fine details of, okay, there is a case where for the first time a hypersonic missile is claimed to have been taken down. It was less to do with the hypersonic missile or the speed per se, and more to do with the geometry at which it was launched. Yeah. So please remember that in weapons, the weapon systems are not so simple. It is not just about what technology they have, how are they launched. It is also about the geometries at which they launched. So that is something which is very, very important. And just one thing, because since we are talking about how really a real war kind of plays out, so I'll just give you one more thing. It's very interesting, and I'm sure a lot of Top Gun fans would really sort of connect to this, is that when you're talking about the basic maneuvers about air defenses and missiles trying to chase these fighters, there are basically three kinds of pursuits that are usually talked about. Of course, you can Google about it, and better than Google, just go watch Top Gun, right? So basically what you will see is that the pursuit of missiles, the basic maneuvers, there are basically three types: lag, lead, and pure. And I'll just tell you what it is, and I'm sure you can totally connect it from your Mission Impossible experiences and your Top Gun experiences, so that you won't have a problem understanding. Now, lag is something in a basic. So I saw a fighter and I sort of I fired at it, right? And it is basically chasing the tail of the fighter. So as the fighter is moving, the missile is moving, okay, like that. So that is a very basic maneuver. This is called a lag pursuit. Then it's called a lead pursuit. Lead pursuit means that I have calculation enough. I can see where it is going, and I have calculation, and I can see that, okay, if you have launched it from point number A, it will take this amount of time. I calculate that time based on the speed of my missile. I first launch it, so that I take a lead, so that जब आप वहाँ पहुँचोगे तो हम आपको वहाँ मिलेंगे, right? It's like that. That's called a lead, pursuit. And third is a pure pursuit. Pure pursuit basically means that regardless of what your trajectory is, I am going to follow you, okay, right, like that. So out of these three, the problem is that when you're talking about hypersonic systems, the speed at which they are going, it becomes next to impossible to have either of these pursuits. Obviously, you cannot lag because the speed is such कि आप पकड़ेंगे कैसे? You cannot lead because something which is moving at hypersonic, you obviously have to move faster than that, okay? Only then can you meet it. And the other thing about pure is again the same thing. Something is a BMW और आप जो है वो ई-रिक्शा पे जा रहे हैं तो आप नहीं पकड़ पाएंगे. So that is basically its speed which makes the hypersonic weapons so difficult to track, intercept, see, and remember that SSITD, it's basically there. And then just to add to it, because sometimes if they are flying at, lower altitudes, it also becomes very difficult to track them. I mean, generally on a radar. So this is the entire picture of how you should be sort of understanding that how do air defenses work against fifth generation and how do air defenses work against hypersonics. The basic concept is the same. And please remember, this game of cat and mouse is constantly evolving. So we will come back to it, but very quickly, just putting it, connecting it with the case of Pakistan and India. Don't worry, Pakistan doesn't have those missiles right now. I mean, our problem with Pakistan is the extended ranges of their PL-15 missiles that they received from China, that we observed were better linked with their AWACS through very good operational data links, and something that really, resulted in their extended ranges that we have to find a way to degrade and suppress, which is different from this kind of a dogfight that we are talking about, you know. So don't worry, it's not about Pakistan, but yes, we know that this is the future of, warfare in many ways. And the other key takeaway from actually our experience in Operation Sindoor is developing more beyond visual range, the BVR missile, so that we stay in the safety of our respective air defenses and fire BVR. And that is where the extended ranges come. So whoever sees you first, because if I have an extended range, is basically the one that sort of, dominates that particular battle. So different things, all connected and yet a little different. So I hope you are able to understand. So I try to simplify it and tell you in a way of a story so that you're able to remember.
And Swasti, since we discussed so much about hypersonic missiles and you just mentioned the S-400,
Yeah.
and
yeah, I actually mentioned that in the context that S-400 in theory remains the only air defense system which is capable of, at least theoretically, taking down the hypersonic missiles, and that example I gave, yeah.
based on that, I'll take the next subscriber question, which is Ravi Rules, who is asking, should we then upgrade or take to an S500? Will that be beneficial? Or is it like the next move?
Yeah, so very quickly, the first thing is that, do we need the S-400s? And yes, of course, we need the S-400s. And we ordered 5 consignments of S-400s from Russia. We've only received 3. And actually, I'm quite worried about the other 2 because I track the Ukraine war and all the weapons that have been used and all the weapons that have been destroyed. So actually, Ukraine has been rather successful in destroying most of the S-400s and S-300s that Russia has, especially that were deployed in the war. And Russia still has S-400s, but that is for protecting its own territory. Right. So according to many intelligence reports, I keep speaking to Germans, to the British, to French, basically there's a lot of pressure on Russia right now that if they give away these S-400s, their territories would be very vulnerable. So they need a certain amount of S-400 because Russia is also vast landmass, okay? So to protect their own territory, they need a certain amount of S-400s, and then whatever extra there was, they were exporting. So the worrying bit there is that, though it's not confirmed, of course, but this is just an extrapolation that you do because you're tracking what kind of weapons are used and destroyed, is that probably the ones that were there for export are already destroyed. So in that case, if it is true, then we will have to sort of wait for Russia to get back its export prowess, because the defense industry is also under a lot of duress because of the war which has been going on for so many years. So let's hope for the best that yes, we should get at least the other 2, the remaining 2. And quickly about S-500, and I think the question is about whether we would like to go in for a joint venture or something. Now very quickly, see, the S-500s are more advanced, but it's not just advanced in terms of ranges, that S-400 ka range itna hai to S-500 ka range usse zyada hai. It's also about, technology is developing very fast, so that, there are better microchips, there's better semiconductors, there's better technology. So it's a whole variety of advancements that come in that generation. So it's like this generation and that generation. The other thing that we have to be careful about, and why I'm not very optimistic about the S-500s per se, is because that what has happened because of these long-standing sanctions on Russia is that it has been technologically cut off from the West. So it doesn't have access to Western chips and Western, those sensitive systems. And for that, it is now relying solely on China. And if you remember that in September 2024, our MOD released a document. So for sure, the decision must have been taken a little while ago. Earlier, but for sure it was made public in September of 2024, that we were asked, our armed forces were asked to cleanse our equipment of Chinese, technology and tech and parts and equipment and all that. So, this is still, I'm still speculating. Of course, we would need to invest a lot in air defenses, but frankly, in particular reference to our learnings from Operation Sindoor, I think what we have used much more is Akash. But yes, we do need S-400 because it's the outer layer. okay, of that air defense. So let's hope, first thing is that we should get the remaining 2 consignments, and then if we are able to get them on time, then there will be this, I would say in many ways that channel will start working again, and then perhaps we can talk about the joint venture for the S-500s as well. But we will have to be very, very realistically sure about what is Russia's capacity, because unlike other countries, a lot of times what is happening behind the scenes in Russia is not really discussed, because this is not really a transparent democracy. So I think that impact should be studied by competent people in our air force, from our technicians, from our engineers, from our scientists, and then if it looks like a road that we can take, of course, then we should take it, because we need air defenses. Yes.
So, Swasti, a lot of discussion on military tech, military weapons, defense system, and I would like to close this segment with a final question by Sankalp6872, who, in quite a long question, basically asks.
Yeah, Sankalp, you've written an essay. Yeah.
But the crux of his question basically is, what is the aftermath of Operation Sindoor?
It is unfolding, and basically, technically speaking, if I were to take a very government wala line, I would say Operation Sindoor abhi sirf pause hua hai.
Khatam nahi hua hai.
Khatam nahi hua hai. But okay, I understand your question. See, very quickly, I'm not sure what kind of a deterrence are we able to establish, because history has shown us that military actions against Pakistan has not been able to really establish a deterrence. What it has given us, it has given us, like, periods, like breaks, where Pakistan didn't really do something as heinous or as serious. So honestly, I'm not sure, because I also would need to see, and not just me, a lot of people are talking about it, that when you say that there is a new normal, right, that every act of terror is going to be treated as an act of war. Now, how will this be implemented? I think there are a lot of things which are said for sort of basically putting forth a certain political strategic posture. How does that really translate into implementable actions is something that only time can tell. So aftermath is still evolving. As you can see, it is still unfolding. From India's side, India kind of realizes that there is a need to speak to partners, and India has dispatched multi-party delegations to several countries. Dr. Jaishankar is also in Europe, and this is when he also called out Europe for being a preacher, but then he went to Europe. So you will see a lot of things happening. I think we will have to wait and watch. But in terms of the most serious, perhaps ponderable here, is that are we able to establish a successful deterrent against Pakistan? I would have mixed, opinion on that, because I don't see that it has a precedent. So maybe some gap. But like I said, that the entire rationale of the Pakistani state is very anti-India. It's completely hooked on Kashmir. So पूरे के पूरे पाकिस्तानी देश का, उनके लोगों का ब्रेन वॉश हम जिस दिन कर पाएंगे उस दिन maybe we have a better answer. But anyway, that was just a joke on a lighter note. What I mean to say is that it is still evolving. So we should just wait and see what kind of reforms do we take. We still have not talked about our own intelligence failures. Okay, so these are uncomfortable questions that are waiting for us. Like I said, that we need a multi-pronged strategy. We need to be internally also careful on what things we have to work on, and we have to also think of a long-term strategy to isolate Pakistan. So I would say let's come back and revisit this question a few months later.
So Swasti, this episode I believe has been dominated by Operation Sindoor yet again, and a lot of and a lot of discussion on the technical aspects of the operation, and due to time constraints we could not take all other questions on South Asia that came, but I did take one question on Bangladesh, and I decided to do it because a lot is happening in Bangladesh, and I thought that it's pertinent that we include it, even though I kept it for the last. And this is Karthik Parashar's question, which is, what can be done to improve our relationship with Bangladesh, and what do you think is the next move in India-Bangladesh relations?
I think there's just one move. We should just wait for the old man to go. He's also on the brink of resigning. I think the army's also made it very clear that the country has to be led by a democratically elected government. So he was a caretaker, guy. It was his 30 seconds of fame. He has done enough damage anyway. Also to ties with India about his, very infamous statements and comments on Northeast. I think we should just wait for that guy to resign. Right. हमें बोलना चाहिए आप resign करिए तब हम आगे बात करेंगे. I mean, I think it will be very clear. It's a short answer. I know I mean, there is much more to that, but then maybe not right now. Maybe we take it up again next time.
Yes, and also there's a lot of back and forth going on whether he will resign or he won't. Is it for the optics? Is it for strategic national unity? But I think these are questions that we can deal with in the next episode. And with that, we come to an end of this episode. And dear viewers, please send in your questions for our next episode where we will see you.